Hey Grace Church, my name is Josh. Welcome to The Weekly on the week of December 19th. Today we are talking about bearing one another's burdens. Well, this week we looked at Galatians chapter 6, verse 1, where it says, bear each other's burdens and so fulfill the law of Christ. And that immediately begs the question, what is the law of Christ? And if you look back at the Gospels, you see multiple times where Jesus tells his disciples, a new command I give you, or a new law I give you. And then he says, love one another. So the new command, the new law that Jesus gives to all of us, the disciples, is to love one another. And Paul takes that concept and he says, bearing each other's burdens is the way that we fulfill the law of Christ. It's the way that we love each other. So essentially, what Paul is communicating is bearing each other's burdens equals loving each other. Loving each other. This is how we love each other. And so to bear each other's burdens in this interpretation in the Greek, it means to like get under the load with them, to like get low enough to you can lift up the thing that they're carrying. And so how do we do that? How do we do that as a church? How does that help us live in community with one another? Well, there's a couple really practical things that we can do as we bear each other's burdens. Number one, we have to actively listen to each other as we are communicating our needs. So when you hear someone say, would you pray for me? That's an opportunity for you to step into that and bear whatever burden they are walking in. When you hear someone share a need or something that they're going through or a transition in their life, that could activate in you an opportunity to step in and say, hey, can I bear that with you? And this is the place, this is how in community that the Holy Spirit of God prompts us and moves us towards loving one another. By actively listening, by paying attention and moving towards people. We just moved here a couple weeks ago and people just started bringing us food. They just took initiative and said, it's probably chaotic at your house. We are going to bear the burden of food with you. And I can tell you, it has blessed us immensely to have people come and to bring us food. And you may feel like that's a small thing, but you take that thing and you multiply it over the life of the church where people are actively listening and engaging each other and loving each other. It can transform a community. And that's the opportunity we have when you read this text. And then secondly, we have to invite other people to help us. We have to be courageous enough to look at our community and say, I am going through this thing and it is burdening me, it's weighing me down. Will you walk with me through this? And that takes courage, that takes vulnerability. That is not easy. I don't think any of us love asking for help, but it is in asking for help that we allow the church to fulfill the command that God has given them to bear our burdens. And so it's only by sharing our needs that the church can step in and bless us and take care of us. So we've got to be courageous enough to hear from the Lord and actively listen and engage. And then secondly, courageous enough to be vulnerable and say, here are my needs. Will you bear these with me? And then lastly, we looked at the motivation where all this comes from, and we recognized again the good news that we have a God who saw our burden. We were burdened by sin, we were held down by sin, we were imprisoned by sin, and we were now dead in our sin. And God saw that burden and He sent Christ to us. And the gospel is the story of Christ bearing our burden, removing the weight of sin from us and carrying it Himself. And that now motivates us because we want to be like Him. We want to live like Him. We want to move in the world like Jesus. And ultimately, Jesus is the great burden bearer. He says in the scriptures, come to me, all you who are weary and heavy laden, and I will give you rest, for my yoke is easy and my burden is light. That is what Christ has done for us. And that should move us and that should motivate us to look at our church and look at the world and say, how can I bear burdens like Christ has bore my burden? So this week, would you be willing to look at someone in your community and say, I need you to bear this burden with me? Would you be willing to do that? Or on the other side, could you look at your community and say, hey, I have some space, I have some desire. Are there people in the community, in your Connect group or in your friend group or whatever community you're part of in Grace Church? Could you look at them and say, I want to bear some burdens? Would people share with you? And because here's what we need to do as a church. This is when we will start to see the Spirit's activity among us. When we develop the extraordinary skill of detecting the burdens of others and devoting ourselves daily to making those burdens lighter. When we develop the extraordinary skill of looking around the church and saying, who can I help make their burden lighter? When we live like that, we will see the Spirit of God in our midst, and we will do the command, which is to love one another. We will fulfill the law of Christ when we live like this. So Grace Church, my prayer is that we could be these kind of people this week. May it be so.